Step back into the 1930s, when kids played with Peashooters, families gathered for Scrabble, and every outfit needed a hat. From Hopscotch to Peter Pan peanut butter, these fads defined a simpler, unforgettable time. Let's explore. Tree sitting. People were bored, so they sat in trees. For what? Bragging rights. A 1930s fad where kids literally competed to see who could stay up in a tree the longest. Was it productive? Absolutely not. Kids were falling out of trees. Some even broke bones, and all for what? A narrative that sitting in a tree somehow gave you social cred. The endurance race escalated to hundreds of hours in the trees, with ground crews passing up food. But what did it accomplish? Nothing. It was a way to distract themselves from the harsh reality of the Great Depression, much like today's endless scrolling on social media. Goldfish swallowing. This was peak absurdity. In 1939, students started swallowing live goldfish. For what? A bet. A bet that soon spiraled into a full-blown craze. You've heard of peer pressure, right? Well, it led one Harvard freshman to chew and gulp down a goldfish for $10. Soon the narrative spread like wildfire across colleges, and records for how many goldfish one could swallow in a sitting started to rise. This wasn't about sustenance or survival, it was about showing off. Like all shallow fads, it fizzled out, but not before turning innocent fish into literal stomach filler for attention. Hardware diet, eating metallic objects. Eating metal. Yes, you heard that right. In 1934, a woman showed up at a hospital complaining of pain. What did the doctors find? Over 1,000 pieces of hardware in her stomach. Not some balanced diet, but literal metal bits. Nuts, bolts, and screws. Why did she do it? Well, her explanation was as flimsy as the fad itself. I guess it was just trying to be funny. This was a bizarre, self-destructive attempt to stand out in an era where standing out meant doing something extreme. And yes, she lived to tell the tale, but what a legacy to leave behind. Morse Codes snores. A husband became convinced that his wife's snoring wasn't just annoyance, it was Morse code. That's right, he believed she was signaling someone in the night through her snores. This delusion escalated into violence, proving that the line between a quirky idea and a dangerous one is often thin. Was there any truth to this bizarre theory? Of course not. But it's a perfect example of how people create narratives in their heads, even out of something as mundane as snoring. Sometimes our own paranoia is the loudest thing in the room. Civic pride handshakes. In 1936, one man suggested that every day, out of the blue, fire sirens should blare throughout Oklahoma City. Why? So people could stop what they're doing, shake hands, and shout about how they lived in the finest city in the United States. A charming idea? Maybe. Productive? Not at all. It was more performative than anything, and a weird attempt to instill civic pride through forced interaction. Just imagine the awkwardness of people shaking hands mid-commute, mid-errand, mid-everything, because someone thought civic pride could be built through random sirens. Claims of ownership of the universe. In 1937, Arthur Dean Lindsay thought he'd one-up the real estate game by filing deeds at a courthouse. But these weren't for land on Earth. Nope, he claimed ownership on the sun, moon, and all the planets except Earth. His rationale? Well, he wanted to be the richest man in the universe. Let's be real, this wasn't about wealth, it was about making a statement. The ultimate look-at-me moment. Did it hold up in court? Of course not. But it showed that people will try to claim ownership of just about anything when ego's involved. Light bulb-shaped egg. When a hen lays an egg shaped like a light bulb, it's not just a quirky headline, it's a commentary on the 1930s obsession with modernity. In 1939, a farmer noticed that after installing a light bulb in his chicken coop, one of his hens stared at it long enough to lay an egg that mirrored its shape. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a world fascinated by new inventions, even farm animals got caught up in the narrative of progress. The egg became a symbol of how even the strangest things could be linked to the era's technological advancements. Canary sent via pigeon. In 1939, they strapped a canary to a pigeon and sent it 20 miles through the sky. Why? Because why not? It was a stunt. It was a stunt that combined two things that were already known for their ability to fly, but made them work together in a completely unnecessary way. This was a time when people would try anything just to see if they could. Was it practical? Not at all. But it added another strange chapter to the long list of bizarre 1930s fads that were more about spectacle than utility. Stickball. Stickball was the ultimate street sport, a stripped-down version of baseball that didn't require much more than a broomstick and a rubber ball. In the 1930s, kids in big cities would take to the streets, using manhole covers as bases and the sides of buildings as foul lines. This was a game born out of necessity, where creativity turned everyday objects into sports equipment. Stickball didn't care about rules or structure. It was about making do with what you had, and that's what made it such a beloved pastime during tough times. Zoot Suits. The Zoot Suit wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a form of rebellion. By the late 1930s, young African Americans, Latinos, and Filipino men in urban areas began donning these oversized, exaggerated suits. But this wasn't just about style, it was about identity. Wearing a Zoot Suit was a way to stand out, to defy the mainstream culture that wanted conformity. These suits were about more than fabric, they were about freedom, and they sparked tensions that culminated in the Zoot Suit riots of 1943. A simple outfit? Hardly. This was fashion with a message. Playing tag. Back in the 1930s, kids didn't need fancy toys or high-tech games to have a blast. All it took was a group of friends, some open space, and the timeless game of tag. It was simple. One person was it, and everyone else just ran for their lives. There were no boundaries, no countdown clocks, just pure adrenaline as you dodged and weaved through the trees or alleyways. No one wore sneakers with cushioned soles, and no one complained about falling on dirt or gravel. If you scraped your knee, well, that was just part of the game, a trophy of sorts. You learned to zigzag, run in circles, and trick your friends with fake-outs. The feeling of lightly touching someone and shouting, "You're it," was pure joy. Today's kids might find tag too basic, but back then, it was everything. And let's be real, parents didn't hover or supervise. You were free to play as long as you could, and when someone got tired or it got too dark, you'd shout, "Game over," and call it a day. The best part? It wasn't about winning or losing. It was just about the fun of the chase. Hopscotch. In the 1930s, hopscotch wasn't just a game, it was an art form. All you needed was some chalk and a good-sized stretch of sidewalk, and you were set. Kids would spend hours carefully drawing the perfect hopscotch grid, making sure each square was just right. A tossed rock or pebble was all it took to get started. You'd hop on one leg, switching feet with precision, aiming to land perfectly within the squares. There were no fancy shoes, no safety gear, just bare feet or worn-out sneakers, hopping from square to square. But hopscotch wasn't just about balance, it was about strategy. If you couldn't land the rock in the right spot, you had to skip that square, and boy did that make things tricky. The competition was fierce, but it was always friendly. Friends would gather around, cheering each other on, laughing when someone lost their balance and tumbled over. And what was the prize? Bragging rights. If you mastered hopscotch, you were the king or queen of the block. Today, kids might prefer screens to chalk, But back then, hopscotch was the ultimate test of skill and agility. Sledding. Winter in the 1930s was magical for one main reason: sledding. When the snow fell, kids grabbed their wooden sleds, the ones with metal runners that glided effortlessly over the snow, and headed for the nearest hill. These sleds weren't padded, and there were no helmets, just the thrill of the cold wind in your face as you raced down the hill. The steeper the hill, the better, and if you wiped out and tumbled in the snow, well, that was just part of the fun. Friends would take turns lining up at the top of the hill and see who could get to the bottom fastest. There were no fancy sledding parks or designated areas, just the neighborhood hills that every kid knew about. If you were lucky, your sled had a steering mechanism, but most kids just held on tight and hoped for the best. Sure, we'd come home with red faces and frozen fingers, but that didn't matter. The thrill of speeding down a hill, out of control yet feeling completely alive, was worth every moment of discomfort. Today's kids might use plastic sleds or snow tubes, but back then, those wooden sleds were pure gold. Sorry, board game. The 1930s might have been a simpler time, but that didn't mean kids didn't love a good board game. Sorry was a game that brought out the best and the worst in friendships. The game's objective was to get all your pieces home before your opponents did. But the twist? You could send someone's piece back to the start with a simple "sorry." And let me tell you, no one ever meant that apology. Family game nights often featured sorry as the go-to choice. Kids would sit around the table, laughing, strategizing, and sometimes even pouting when they were sent back to the beginning. There was no digital board or fancy graphics, just a simple board game. Colorful pieces and a stack of cards that could turn your luck in an instant. The thrill of sorry wasn't just in winning, though. It was in the sweet, almost mischievous satisfaction of sending someone back to the start after they had worked so hard to advance. Sibling rivalries were ignited, friendships tested, and in the end, it was all in good fun. Sure, it wasn't as flashy as today's games, but in the 1930s, sorry was a household favorite. Miniature golf. If there was one weekend activity that defined the 1930s, it was miniature golf. Families would pile into their cars, often a big event in itself, and head to the local miniature golf course. These courses were nothing like today's high-tech mini-golf spots with digital features and fancy lights. Instead, they were simple, yet full of charm. There were tiny windmills to putt through, little bridges to cross, and tricky angles that tested everyone's skills. The courses were often homemade, with uneven ground and quirky obstacles that added to the fun. And no one was too worried about their golf score. It wasn't about being the best. It was about spending time with friends and family, laughing at how the ball bounced unpredictably. Parents, kids, and even grandparents would take turns with their little putters, aiming for that elusive hole-in-one. Sure, it was just a game, but it was the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Today's courses might be more advanced, but back then, miniature golf was about connection, laughter, and a bit of friendly competition. ViewMaster 3D Viewer. In the 1930s, the ViewMaster 3D Viewer was the height of visual entertainment. Before television became a household must, kids and adults alike would spend hours peering through the binocular-like viewer at colorful 3D slides. It was like holding a tiny world in your hands, with each click bringing a new scene to life. From national parks to popular cartoons of the time, the ViewMaster took you places you could only dream of visiting. There were no remote controls and certainly no streaming services. Instead, you'd click the lever on the side of the viewer, and with a satisfying click, the scene would change. The depth and clarity of the images were stunning for the time, making it a magical experience. The ViewMaster wasn't just a toy, it was a window into a world of imagination. Whether you were exploring faraway lands or following the adventures of your favorite characters, this simple device was captivating. Kids would trade reels with friends, each one offering a new adventure. In today's world of virtual reality and high-definition screens, the Viewmaster may seem primitive, but in the 1930s, it was a game-changer in home entertainment. Scrabble. Words became a battlefield in the 1930s with the introduction of Scrabble. This iconic board game wasn't just about putting letters together. It was about strategy, vocabulary, and a little bit of luck. Families and friends gathered around tables, tiles in hand, as they competed to create the highest scoring words. It wasn't enough to know common words. The real players used obscure words to rake in points. The thrill of Scrabble wasn't just in spelling the words, but in blocking your opponent from reaching the triple word score. The moment someone would lay down a 7-letter word and clear their tiles was the peak of triumph. And let's not forget about the friendly arguments about whether a word was even valid. Dictionaries were kept close by to settle any disputes. In a time before spell check and autocorrect, Scrabble challenged kids and adults alike to think critically and creatively. Today, it's a must in households and still sparks friendly competition. But in the 1930s, it was a novel way to spend a quiet evening, combining fun with learning in the best way possible. The satisfaction of using that tricky Q or Z tile is something Scrabble players still chase today. Paresi. Paresi, known as the royal game of India, made its way into American homes in the 1930s and quickly became a family favorite. This game wasn't just about rolling dice. It was a test of strategy, patience, and a little bit of luck. Players would move their pieces around the board, aiming to get them home before their opponents did. But the catch? Well, you could capture your opponent's pieces and send them all the way back to the start. There was something thrilling about waiting for that perfect roll to land on your opponent's piece. Kids would hold their breath, hoping for the right number on the dice to send their rival back to square one. And if you were the one being sent back, well, there was always next time. Paresi was the kind of game that brought families together. Parents, kids, and grandparents could all sit down and enjoy the game's simple yet strategic nature. The bright colors of the game board and the satisfying sound of dice rolling across the table made it a sensory delight. Even though more complex games have come along since, Paresi was a thing of 1930s family game nights. Red Ryder BB gun. Every kid in the 1930s dreamed of owning a Red Ryder BB gun. Made famous by comic strips and radio programs, this air rifle was the ultimate symbol of adventure and independence. Kids would take their BB guns out into the fields or woods, pretending they were cowboys or sharpshooters. It wasn't just a toy, it was a rite of passage. Parents didn't worry about safety gear or supervision. Kids were taught how to handle the BB gun responsibly and then sent off on their adventures. Targets were often tin cans or homemade bullseyes, and hitting that perfect shot brought a rush of pride. Sure, there were the occasional accidents, but that was all part of growing up in the 1930s. The Red Ryder BB gun wasn't just about shooting. It represented freedom, imagination, and the spirit of the Wild West. Every time a kid aimed down the sights, they weren't just playing, they were embodying their heroes. Today, the idea of letting kids run around with BB guns might raise eyebrows, but in the 1930s, it was a beloved pastime that shaped many childhoods. Hood ornaments. Cars in the 1930s weren't just modes of transportation, they were expressions of style, and nothing showcased that style more than hood ornaments. These shiny, intricate sculptures graced the front of nearly every car, turning automobiles into works of art. Hood ornaments came in all shapes and sizes too, from the sleek, leaping Jaguar to the majestic Spirit of Ecstasy on Rolls-Royces. Driving around town with a stunning hood ornament was a status symbol. It was more than just decoration. It represented luxury, speed, and elegance. People would marvel at the craftsmanship of these tiny sculptures, some of which were even plated in gold or silver. Car manufacturers used hood ornaments as a way to distinguish their brands, and collectors often sought out rare designs. Whether it was a streamlined bird or an abstract figure, these ornaments made each car unique. Today, hood ornaments have mostly disappeared, replaced by flat logos, but in the 1930s, they were a key feature of any stylish automobile. They added a touch of class and personality, turning heads wherever they went. Johnny on a Pony. Long before playground equipment was everywhere, kids in the 1930s entertained themselves with simple but energetic games like Johnny on a Pony. The rules were simple. One group of kids would form a line, bending over while holding on to each other's waists, creating what looked like a human pony. Another group would then take turns jumping onto the pony, trying to pile on without collapsing the line. The challenge was all about balance and strength. The kids on the pony would tense up, holding tight as each jumper landed, hoping the makeshift pony wouldn't topple. And for the jumpers, it was about getting as many people on without anyone falling off. When the pony finally collapsed, it was met with laughter and maybe a few minor scrapes. There were no formal rules, and the game could go on for hours. No referees, no adults overseeing things, just kids enjoying the thrill of testing their strength and balance. Johnny on a Pony wasn't just a game, it was a way to burn off energy, test teamwork, and have a blast. It might seem simple by today's standards, but back then, it was a playground favorite. Kilroy Was Here. In the 1930s, before memes and graffiti became widespread, there was Kilroy. The phrase "Kilroy was here" became a nationwide phenomenon, scribbled on walls, fences, and even military vehicles. This simple doodle of a bald man peeking over a wall, paired with the phrase "Kilroy was here," represented a playful kind of rebellion. Nobody knew exactly who Kilroy was, but that was part of the charm. Kids and adults alike would find clever places to leave the doodle, from school desks to bathroom stalls. It became a game of sorts. Where would Kilroy pop up next? Some say it started as a way for factory workers to mark their completed work, while others believe it began as a military joke. Regardless of its origins, Kilroy Was Here became a symbol of fun and mischief. It wasn't about causing harm or vandalizing property. It was about leaving a mark and being part of a secret community. Everyone knew Kilroy, even if they didn't know each other. Though it faded in popularity after World War II, Kilroy left its mark on the 1930s, proving that even the simplest of doodles can spark a nationwide craze. Mahjong. In the 1930s, Mahjong wasn't just a game, it was a cultural phenomenon. This ancient Chinese tile game found its way into American living rooms and quickly became a favorite pastime, especially among women's social clubs. It wasn't just about matching tiles, it was about strategy, memory, and socializing. Groups would gather around tables, the sound of clattering tiles filling the air as players worked to create winning hands. Mahjong sets were often beautifully crafted, with ivory-like tiles engraved with intricate designs. The rules could be complex for newcomers, but once you learned the game, it became an addictive challenge. The goal was to be the first to complete a hand by drawing and discarding tiles to create combinations. But Mahjong wasn't just about the game itself, it was a social event. Friends would host Mahjong nights, complete with snacks and drinks, as they competed to see who could out-strategize the others. The game required patience, sharp thinking, and a bit of luck. In the 1930s, playing Mahjong wasn't just a hobby, it was a way to connect with friends and neighbors, creating lasting memories with every round. Mandatory hats. In the 1930s, no outfit was complete without a hat. Whether you were a man or a woman, rich or poor, hats were a mandatory accessory that signified style, status, and social norms. Men wouldn't be caught outside without a fedora, trilby, or bowler perched on their heads, while women wore elegant cloche hats or wide-brimmed styles, often adorned with feathers or flowers. Hats weren't just for special occasions. They were a part of daily life. Walking down the street without one would make you stand out, and not in a good way. For men, tipping your hat as a polite gesture was common, whether greeting someone or showing respect. For women, hats were often coordinated with gloves and handbags, completing a sophisticated look. Hat stores were booming in the 1930s, with every town having at least one where people could find the perfect fit and style. Even children wore hats, flat caps for boys and bonnets for girls. Today, hats are more of an accessory than a necessity, but in the 1930s, they were essential. To step outside without a hat was like leaving home without shoes. It just wasn't done. Moving to the suburbs. The 1930s marked the beginning of a trend that would shape American society for decades, moving to the suburbs. After the Great Depression, many families sought a fresh start, leaving crowded cities for the promise of greener pastures. The idea of owning a home with a yard, away from the hustle and bustle of urban life, was the American dream. Suburban life meant more space, cleaner air, and a sense of community. Neighborhoods were quiet, with tree-lined streets and houses that all had their own unique charm. People knew their neighbors, and kids had plenty of room to play outside. Back then, a move to the suburbs represented stability, a chance to rebuild after tough times. With the rise of suburban living, car ownership became more important, as public transportation was limited in these new developments. Families would pile into their cars and drive to town for groceries or leisure activities. Today, the suburbs are often seen as a standard way of life, but in the 1930s, it was a bold move towards a new lifestyle, one that promised peace, space, and a brighter future. Peashooters. Peashooters were the definition of simple fun in the 1930s. Made from a hollow straw or pipe, all you needed were some dried peas and a good aim. Kids would roam around their neighborhoods, pea shooters in hand, ready to take aim at makeshift targets, often old tin cans, fences, or occasionally an unsuspecting friend's back. There were no batteries, no complicated rules, just pure unfiltered fun. Pea shooters encouraged creativity too. Kids would invent their own games, competing to see who had the best aim or who could hit the most targets. The weapons were harmless, but they delivered a satisfying sting when someone got hit. Parents didn't worry too much about the occasional bruise, and kids learned to be quick on their feet to avoid becoming a target. Pea shooters weren't just toys. They were part of the larger culture of outdoor play that defined the 1930s. No screens, no gadgets, just kids with pea shooters having fun and making memories. Peter Pan peanut butter. In the 1930s, Peter Pan peanut butter wasn't just a snack, it was a must in almost every household. Introduced in 1928, it quickly became a favorite among both kids and adults. Creamy, rich, and packed with protein, it was an affordable and delicious way to add something special to sandwiches, cookies, and even just a spoon straight out of the jar. Peter Pan's iconic mascot, the boy who never grew up, added a touch of magic to every jar. Advertisements touted the peanut butter as not only delicious, but also nutritious, a food that could fuel kids for their days of playing tag or hopscotch. Mums loved it because it was easy to pack in lunches or serve with bread when times were tough. While today we have countless brands and varieties of peanut butter, in the 1930s, Peter Pan stood out as the brand that brought a bit of fun and whimsy to the pantry. Whether you preferred creamy or crunchy, Peter Pan peanut butter was a beloved treat that left an indelible mark on childhoods during that decade. Following celebrity lifestyles, cafe society. Too many people glorified cafe society, idolizing the lifestyles of the rich and famous. But let's be clear, this wasn't about culture or intellect, it was a stage scene for the elite. It was a way for those in power to flaunt wealth and privilege, while everyone else struggled during the Great Depression. The narratives spun around the allure of celebrities weren't meant to elevate the masses, but to distract them from real issues. The glitz of the cafe society was like selling a status. In reality, it perpetuated class divides under the guise of sophistication. People bought into it, just like today's influencers, more about selling an image than producing anything meaningful. Sure, it was fun to follow, but looking back, it was all smoke and mirrors, a fantasy that provided little but superficial escape. Playing Monopoly. Monopoly, the iconic board game, was a success, but not because it offered any real lessons on business or economics. It was at its core an oversimplified portrayal of capitalism, peddling the notion that anyone could get rich by crushing others in a ruthless property war. The game didn't teach players about the actual hardships of owning and maintaining properties or dealing with debt. It was all about domination. And that's the rub. Monopoly wasn't about community or cooperation. It was about monopolizing everything for personal gain. The narratives around the game? Well, that it was a family bonding experience. In truth, it probably caused more arguments than it solved, though, and its lessons were shallow at best. Just like today's simulation games, it sold a fantasy version of reality that glossed over real-world challenges. Reading comic strips. People treated comic strips like they were the pulse of American culture, but let's be real, they were mostly escapism, not art. Sure, the bold characters and exaggerated adventures were fun, but it was never about depth. Comics were narratives designed to distract from the harsh realities of the era, the Great Depression, and global instability. They served a purpose, to offer a fantasy world where good always triumphed, but that world was so far removed from reality that it didn't improve anyone's life. They weren't revolutionary, they were superficial entertainment. Yet people bought into them like they were the answers to life's problems. The truth is, they were cheap distractions, no different than today's viral memes or shallow social media trends, designed to capture attention but never really deliver anything of lasting value. Checkers. Checkers was never about strategy or competition. It was about killing time. While it masqueraded as a game of wits, there wasn't much skill involved. It was repetitive, predictable, and people who claimed it taught them anything about tactics were fooling themselves. Checkers didn't require any real intellectual engagement. It just kept people occupied, distracted from the harshness of the reality during the 1930s. But society latched onto it like it was the go-to game for sharpening minds. In reality, it was a dull, overly simple pastime that held no deeper value. People got swept up in the narrative that games like checkers were important, but it was just another distraction, a way to pass the time, no different than flipping through endless TikToks today. Charades. Charades, a party game that felt like a cornerstone of social gatherings, was really just about social posturing. It wasn't a game designed for intellectual stimulation or to bring people together meaningfully. Instead, it was a performance. Players acted out exaggerated gestures, and others guessed. But what was the point? People praised it for fostering camaraderie, but the truth is, it was just an easy way to fill awkward silences at gatherings. It didn't spark any deeper connections or meaningful conversations. Charades was sold as a social icebreaker, but ultimately it was superficial interaction. The game left no lasting impact. It was pure fluff, a way to kill time without adding value to the relationships between people. Marbles and jacks. Marbles and jacks were once seen as essential childhood games. But really, what did they teach? Coordination? Sure. But beyond that, they were just mindless activities. There was no creativity, no room for innovation, just a set of rules that repeated endlessly. They were distractions for kids, sometimes to keep them busy and out of trouble. Adults pushed the narrative that these games were beneficial for development, but that was more about convincing themselves than anything. Like today's mobile games, marbles and jacks were the shallow distractions of their day, giving parents the illusion that their kids were engaged in something worthwhile. In reality, it was the 1930s version of wasting time. Jumping rope. Jump rope seemed innocent enough, but it was just another way to fill time. It wasn't about building athletic skill or fostering community, even though people tried to frame it that way. It was monotonous and repetitive. Jump, swing, repeat. Yet it became a trend, with groups of kids engaged in elaborate chants and rhymes while they skipped. But the reality is, it never made anyone better at anything. It didn't foster creativity or solve real-world problems, and in retrospect, it was just a filler activity. Jump rope was marketed as a fun, healthy game, but it was simply an excuse to keep kids busy, much like the endless fitness trends that crop up today. We've journeyed through some of the most iconic fads from the 1930s, from the days of playing tag and hopscotch, to the thrill of racing down snowy hills on sleds, and even testing your vocabulary with Scrabble. The charm of miniature golf, the thrill of wielding a Red Ryder BB gun, and the simple joy of a Viewmaster 3D viewer remind us of a time when imagination and simplicity were all we needed for fun. If you've enjoyed reliving these forgotten pastimes, there's plenty more nostalgia to come. Don't miss out on future videos that will take you back in time with more fads, trends, and stories that shape the past. So if you're a fan of history, a lover of nostalgia, or just want to learn about the cool things that people used to do, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button, share this video with friends who'd love a trip down memory lane, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the fun. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.